Hi, everyone. This is Alex Metricardi, Chief Marketing and Public Relations Officer for Living Branches, and today is Friday, January 8th. Welcome to you. Welcome to Ed Brubaker, our Living Branches CEO. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Alex.
Perhaps we should take just a minute and explain our new format.
That might be good.
We are meeting remotely today for this video, mostly because I have a family member who is theoretically exposed to COVID right now, and even though that person has tested negative. But in light of the fact that Ed and I, when we film our videos, film without masks, so that it's easier for people to understand us, we wanted to make sure, out of an abundance of caution, there was no chance of infection. So we are miles apart and should be safe.
Yeah, that's right. And we typically are physically distanced too in the room. So we try to do things appropriately. But I think it's just a good reminder again that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And we also think about these things and continue to think about these things. So it's kind of in some ways, a good visual example that we're taking this seriously and continue to work at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with a COVID roundup, if we shall, of what is happening on our campuses. And right now at Dock Woods, we have one positive resident, and that person is actually in Dock Acres. Everyone else who was positive previously in healthcare is no longer testing positive. So the last few that we had remaining from last week have been moved into the recovered column, which we're very grateful for. Also at Dock Woods, we have 8 staff persons who are testing positive. At Souderton, we have 2 persons in personal care, 5 persons in healthcare, and 6 staff persons testing positive. And this week at the Willows, we have 3 staff persons who are testing positive. And I suppose it's worth mentioning at the Willows that we did complete our first round of resident testing. Because we have those positive staff members, we tested all residents at the Willows as they are a personal care community. And we did receive all of those results back this morning, and all residents are negative at this time. So we're very pleased about that result. Well, maybe let's talk about vaccines, shall we? As it seems to be taking up a great deal of time and attention for everyone right now. As we speak, there is a vaccine clinic going on at the Dock Woods campus.
Yes, that's right. There is, and it is our second one. Typically, that is not what happens. You don't typically get 2, but I think there was a snafu that happened, which turned out to be in our favor, but I just want to be clear, it's not typically what happens, and we're only anticipating 1 vaccine clinic at Souderton, so just wanted to be clear about that. So we did have our first one last week at Dock Woods. I think we announced that in our video last week that it was coming up, and then of course today is our second one. So we are very, I would say, privileged to be at this place. When I've talked to staff and others, to be in the first, I think it's around 4.5 million or so to be vaccinated in the United States out of 330 million. That is a privilege that I don't take lightly. And I really would encourage everyone, as it's available to them, now staff, residents of healthcare, et cetera, eventually others, to view it in that light as well. We are among the privileged early adopters, if you will, and getting the benefits of all those really smart people who have worked on this. So I've reflected too sometimes that almost there's a twinge of guilt as well to say, wow, what did I do to deserve this? But the flip side is now that it's available and we need to do it. And for me, one of the reasons I did it was to be an example to the organization. I think it's important for us as leaders to do that, but it's important to also recognize the privilege and the blessing it is to be able to be at this place and to be thankful, even as that needle is going into our arm. And believe me, it didn't hurt. Honestly, I literally hardly felt it going in, but to be breathing a prayer of thanks, honestly, when that is happening, because this has been a challenging year. And to be at this point, I can't overemphasize how amazing it is and how privileged we are to be at this point.
Maybe let's give a summary of what happened at the Doc Woods Clinic, because I do have family members who are writing in to ask about that. We had healthcare residents who were able to be vaccinated, and then also staff members from any area that is a staff member, they could be vaccinated. And I've had questions about what were reactions that people experienced. Were there allergic reactions? Did we experience anything like what we read about in the news?
Yeah, and the reality is we did not have any serious reactions. My understanding is we had a person who had some side effects, that fever or otherwise, whatever it was, that prevented them from being at work a day or so. There were some headaches reported. I know for myself, I didn't think about it a whole lot, and I think one time Saturday evening, I bumped my arm and I'm like, oh, that hurts. Oh, that's right. That's where I got my vaccine, that kind of thing. And I maybe felt a slight fever at one point, but not even enough to take my temperature. And then I would say I was tired, but honestly, was that because of the vaccine or because we were there kind of all day with the emotional intensity and all that kind of thing? So it's hard to know, but for me personally, it was minimal. And based on what we've heard, I understand the impact in the organization to be minimal as well. And that's what we've heard from others as well. That's not to say there won't be in the future or they're not happening other places, but there absolutely were not any kind of severe reactions. And that would reflect what you would know at this point too. Is that correct?
Yeah. I had an opportunity to interview one of the nurses that was observing persons after they got their vaccine. You know, you have to wait for 15 minutes at least. And we had 230 plus people that went through that clinic. And she was telling me that there was one person that might have had a reaction there. She was feeling very warm, but once she instructed her to take off her coat and her sweater, she cooled down and felt better. So is it a reaction? Who knows?
When you're inside in a elevated heat environment, having a coat and a sweater on can also make you feel feverish too. So yeah, and so those kind of things would be in that normal category. Just to clarify too, the 230 thereabouts plus or minus, that would have been staff. Mm-hmm. We also had some vendors such as Caring Hospice and other persons that came through. And then in addition to that, we also had residents of Doc Terrace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now, at Souderton then, we are going to have a clinic on the 14th, which is next Thursday. And the information that we have right now is that persons who are able to be vaccinated at that clinic will be staff and then also healthcare residents. So our team in healthcare is working to make contact with all families to say, do you want your loved one to be vaccinated? If you're a family member and you're not unsure whether or not permission has been given and you want to make sure that your loved one can get vaccinated, you can just email vaccines@livingbranches.org and we can make sure to pass that on. It is probably worthwhile to note that someone who has very recently had COVID, or someone who received the monoclonal antibody treatment, the bamlanivimab, those persons who got the antibody treatment are not eligible to get a vaccine for at least 90 days. So there are a fair number of people that are falling into that category. But for others, they certainly, the team in healthcare has been working to sign people up. Now, there may be a change, who knows, because based on what happened at Doc Woods today, when the vaccine clinicians arrived from CVS to Doc Woods today, they indicated that they knew that they would have extra vials of vaccine available. And so they indicated they would vaccinate our personal care residents.
Well, and it happened maybe slightly differently than that, but the point is they made us aware of this, but they didn't know what to do. And so Nancy Donnelly, the executive director, was certainly interested in getting our personal care residents vaccinated. And so she called me this morning because the challenge is in these kind of situations, we tell people what we believe to be the truth and what's happening. And so we want to, as things change, then give those updates. And, you know, honestly, it's probably fitting that here on January 8th of 2021, that it kind of is a capstone to a year of things happening at the 11th hour, and we need to make jukes and jives and and figure out what we're doing. That's been the nature of our life this past year. So to have that happen again today was kind of a fitting culmination to that, I believe. But the bottom line is this: they came and it turned out they had extra doses. So what do? Who might you vaccinate? And so personal care residents are the next one that is in that grouping that would have been happening. And so the bottom line is this: do you vaccinate or do you throw it out? Because that's really the option. There,
and that's
you can't like, hey, let's put it back in the deep freeze. Yeah. So it wasn't a very hard decision in that sense, except for the fact that we want to be clear on this video and in our communications that that was not part of the original plan. It was a last minute change. We are very pleased that we were able to do that, but that does not mean that that's going to happen at Souderton or elsewhere. I read a story that I forget where it was, but they ran into a situation where they were the plan to vaccinate this certain group wasn't able to happen. So what do? And so I think there was a prison nearby or something like that, and they vaccinated the prisons and prisoners and some other people. And so the other option would have been to throw it out, and certainly you don't want to do that. So that's what our situation was, and we just wanted to be clear about that so people knew. But I think most people, given these circumstances we were in, would say, yes, that's the obvious choice. But we want to be clear and transparent, as we feel like we've tried to do all year, because just because that happened today doesn't mean it'll happen at Souderton next week. In fact, it likely will not happen at Souderton next week, because that's not how it happened last week at Dock Woods. So, but it's the way it is, and we dealt with enough things in the past year that were like last minute bad news. This was nice to have last minute good news. So you deal with it and you transparently communicate and move on.
And you're right. What would the choices have been? You would never have wanted to say, well, we're just not going to use the serum. So, I mean, probably we should just clarify too, because I have had several emails this week from residential living residents who are saying, what have you heard about when we're going to be able to get vaccinated? And the short answer is not really anything.
Yeah, that's right. And as soon as we know things, we're not even sure if the vaccinations would happen on campus, whether you need to get it eventually from your physician, from CVS. We really just don't know that. And we wish we did, but we don't. And so we'll let people know as soon as we know, but you know, that's the best we can do.
So we have two questions this week for our question and answer session that nicely reflect the problem, or let's say they nicely reflect two ends of the spectrum that we're dealing with when it comes to vaccinations. And so one of the questions is from a family member of a resident. And this person is saying, how is it possible that staff persons can choose whether or not to get the vaccine? I would assume you would require it just as you do the flu shot. And then we have a staff person who's writing in to say, what does it mean when you say that if you do not get the COVID vaccine, you will not be eligible for COVID leave? I don't want to take this vaccine because I don't know about the long-term impacts. So we've been working very hard on education. There's a lot to learn about this vaccine. There's a lot that is specific information that residents and families want to know, that employees want to know. And so education has been really our overall push for this past week. But I think those two emails do show we've got very different opinions among our constituents here in this organization as far as what should be happening.
Yeah, and these are very good questions, and it illustrates, as you said, the different mindsets that are out there. And so, good information. I'll try to summarize it too, because I'm also paying attention to the time, so we make sure that we get the Zoom seminar taped well enough. But the bottom line is this: we understood, or we thought we understood early on, that because it was under an EUA, or emergency use authorization, that it was not either advisable or even permissible to require this vaccine like we would with the flu shot. Having said that, we're not sure, because honestly, I've read things written by different attorneys, and one say one thing and one the other. So theoretically, maybe we could have required it. We made the decision, I made the decision not to require it, because it is relatively new, and we wanted to first say, let's get educated, let's get comfortable, let's work at this. Maybe it will be something effective too. That is true. It's a requirement now. But let me tell you, it took many years to get there. It was a process to get from where we had been, which when it was not required, to have it be required. And then if you didn't get it, you had to wear a mask, all the different steps. So it was probably, I would say, at least a 4 or 5 year potentially process to get there. So it's easy to say, well, you require it, but you need to remember how we got to this place. So that would be one thing. The other thing is, it is new and people have legitimate questions about it, and we're putting out a lot of information. I've told my own personal story of my wife and I of how a medicine that was given to her mother impacted she and I, as far as the ability to have biological children. And so I totally get the reality of long-term consequences. I was disturbed with what was feeling like the politics of this at the time, but I've done a lot of research, I've done a lot of reading, I've done a lot of talking with physicians, et cetera. And I even believe that the generation we serve, who live here, or most of them, many of them would have been in an experience where they might have seen polio and seen what a vaccine could do. We now have anti-vax movements in the United States. And so that to me is very disturbing, to be honest with you, because it doesn't take long for diseases come roaring back if you don't keep them under wraps. But the generation that's growing up now, this is what they know. It's not their fault. We created this world for them. But the bottom line is this is what they know. So it's easy to think, well, this is the way life always was. Couldn't be further from the truth. This is not the way life always was. But it's a process to get there. So those questions to me illustrate generational differences. They illustrate personality differences. Some people tend to say you just tell people to do stuff. Others tend to say let's educate, let's get people on board. So it just is a great illustration of the differences in people, the differences in generations, the differences in approaches. But we, I would say, are taking a very strong approach. We're encouraging it very strongly. We're ramping up the encouragement / pressure to get it. But there's reasons we did not require it at this moment in time. But as of now, I believe you indicated earlier today in another meeting we were in that we're at about 61% of our staff that have either gotten it or have signed up. Our goal is to get to at least 70 to 80%, which I would consider in generally accepted herd immunity standpoint. I'd love to get 80 to 90 or above 90%. And we are above 90% on the Living Branches Leadership Group team right now as of 10 minutes ago. But having said that, it's a process to get there. But I'm confident we'll get there, but we are absolutely doing tons of education. You're very involved with that. I'm involved with it. Human Resources, Murray Sheeran, so many people. There's so many opportunities. We're really working very, very hard at this. And I'm confident we can get to where we need to be, but and celebrate the 61% that have signed up or will be from a staff member standpoint. But we're continuing to work very, very hard at it. That gives you some sense of what we're dealing with.
I was out yesterday on campus talking to various team members in personal care, healthcare, and memory care, and it was interesting to just kind of some of them have already gotten it. There was one person I talked to was like the first hour of the first day that it was eligible. She was ready and she was there. There are others that are still doing research. They've been doing a lot of research. I was pleased that I didn't have anyone who said to me, no, I don't want it, and walked away. They're being very thoughtful about it. And I think it's fair to remember that we have a lot of young women who work for us. And one of the questions we hear repeatedly is, how does this impact potential abilities to get pregnant? Or what if I am pregnant? What am I supposed to do? So there's a lot of good, thoughtful research that's going into this right now, and prayerful consideration, I think, by some of our team members.
Yeah. The flip side of that is nobody knows what the long-term consequence of having COVID is. So we are also encouraging staff, and this was a point that somebody made this morning in our meeting, that there's a legitimate concerns about the vaccine. But we also need to talk about the flip side. Look at what happens to the bodily functions in people that get COVID. We don't know what the long-term impact of that is either. And we know it's not the flu. It doesn't just primarily impact your respiratory system. It can affect almost any system in your body. And so COVID can be incredibly dangerous too. And for all we know, it could cause long-term consequences as well. So it's like, which wagon do you want to hit yourself on? And for me personally, I will absolutely, hands down, believe the scientific community and those smart people that are working on this, who I feel are working on our behalf, to say, absolutely, get the vaccine. It is a much better way to get this society back to safety, than getting the disease. So I think those are the things to balance too, that people need to think about. It's not just about the vaccine. And we got to remember, this is to keep COVID away. And COVID is a nasty, nasty disease. Look what it did to us in 2020.
Well, and some of the research that I was doing this morning about how to answer these questions better, they've been trying to use mRNA technology for cancer research for decades. And they've been doing human trials with mRNA since 2011. So I was reading report after report from medical journals where they were saying this is a safe and proven technology. So I understand that people are concerned because they haven't heard about it. But when you do the research, this is very safe.
That's right. And I think the other thing too is, if we want to be consistent, we need to be consistent. Okay. We have a person retiring in the SSO today. And so he likes to joke about donuts, even though he doesn't really like to eat them. So we got some donuts to recommend. Then do the research. Don't just ask the questions and then run away. That's not intelligent. That's not appropriate. That's not consistent. But do your research and come to an answer. I can respect that. What I can't respect is people that say no, but I have no interest in looking at it further. That to me is just sticking your head in the sand, and that's what we want to keep working at. But overall, we're, I think, at a good place, and I'm confident we'll keep working at it. But I just would encourage people to do the research and make it happen.
Exactly. All right. Any final thoughts?
I don't know, other than just saying I'm excited to be at this place. You said 2011 was mRNA technology.
Yep.
What would have happened if we had COVID in 2010? What if I lived in the 1850s? There's a lot of things that of this past year, having nothing to do with COVID, that were quite uncomfortable, and frankly, what happened this week in Washington was very unsettling and uncomfortable. But I still appreciate being alive today than in the Middle Ages or in the 1800s, even though it's very interesting to read books about those times. But think about it, folks. We are privileged to be living now, when the minds that are working on this, it's just amazing. So I just would encourage us to frankly, first and foremost, breathe a prayer of thanks that we are at this place and there's some hope on the horizon, and that these men and women who are doing the research, they are using their God-given brains to help all of us. It's just very humbling when you think about it that way. And so that's maybe the thought I would leave.